is one of my least favourite passages of scripture, this gospel, because I always get the feeling that Jesus is talking about the priest right at the beginning. Beware of the scribes who like to walk about in long robes to be greeted obsequiously in the market squares. And it reminds me of another passage which occurs towards the beginning of Lent. And there Jesus has a similar message, but he says there, beware those who like to wear purple and fine linen. And of course, being the beginning of Lent, the priest is dressed nicely in the best purple. But today we have two different scenes in the gospel, all focused around the temple. The first part, Jesus is teaching his disciples, and then he goes and sits outside the treasury of the temple and makes some observations on what he sees. And on surface appearances, the two sections seem a little bit disconnected, but when we dig a little bit deeper, we see that the message is in fact the same. The scribes who Jesus criticizes at the beginning of the gospel for walking around in long robes and being greeted in market squares and things like that, are in fact doing what they should be doing. They're not doing anything wrong. Just as a priest in the Catholic Church should wear the various vestments that are prescribed for him, it's good for a priest to be called Father, to recognize that it's not so much Marcus the man who does this work, but Christ the priest who does the work in me. So the scribes were simply doing what they should have been doing. So the problem was not with what they were doing. Jesus is not criticizing them for what they were doing. He's criticizing their motivation. They were doing it for their own glory and for their own love, not out of love for their Lord, for their God. When we go to the second part of the gospel, we see this contrast between the people who put in lots of money into the treasury from what they have left over, and the poor widow who puts in all she has, which by comparison is not much at all. And why then is she the one who receives praise? The reason is because what the Lord is looking for is not so much external demonstration, but again, it's about the motivation. The people who put in much did it out of what they had left over. There wasn't the same sense of sacrifice and generosity as there was with that poor widow. For her, the fact that she gave all she had reflects the interior reality, namely that her whole heart is given over to the Lord. And this is what Christ challenges his disciples to. A love, to purify their love, to do the right thing, not for their own glory, but truly for the glory of God, with no self-interest. How often today we find it hard to follow the Lord because it doesn't fit my own agenda, doesn't fit my own plan. Or when we do the right thing, we do it out of self-interest. We do it because it's good for me in that moment. But when it's not good for me, then I'm happy to leave the right thing aside. The Lord wants us to love him not only in external action, but with a real purity of heart, with a complete generosity of spirit, complete dedication. And then we can ask ourselves, when we come to Mass, which is in a sense like when we, like that poor widow, bring our two small coins. The bread and the wine are our two small coins that we bring to offer the Lord. What's our motivation? We ask the Lord to purify our hearts so that when Christ renews his self-offering to the Father in the bread and wine, when it becomes his body and blood, our hearts too are being offered to the Lord and our lives being transformed.